Welcome to Donnelly College. My name is Rieber, and I'm the marketing manager here at Donnelly. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We're excited to present Donnelly Talks, answering Phil Francis's call on the environment. This Donnelly Talk is sponsored in part by the Benedictine Sisters of Mount St. Scholastica and the Mount Longari Committee, honoring Longari Matai, a 1964 graduate of Mount St. Scholastica College. We have two great speakers here to discuss the changing climate from an interfaith perspective. Monsignor Stuart Swetland is the 7th president of Donnelly College, where he's also a professor of leadership and Christian ethics. Monsignor Swetland graduated from the United States Naval Academy and was a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford. Rabbi Moti Rieber joins us from Kansas Interfaith Power and Light, where he is the director. A 2004 graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, probably butchered that, in Pennsylvania. He is a longtime activist on peace, social justice, and environmental issues. And now I will turn the mic over to Monsignor Swetland for a prayer.
Thank you. We are so honored to be able to... Is it?
Yeah, it's not
Okay, Madam Chair. We're so honored to be able to get together this evening. We're so thankful that you came to be with us this evening as we together do this act, really of public theology, each in our own traditions, of looking at our relationship to creation. Of course, we chose this date close to the celebration in the Catholic tradition of the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi, which will be Sunday. And it's in that spirit which I will open with a prayer attributed to the patron saint of environmentalism, St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Well.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Monsignor Swetland for inviting me to take part in this event today. It's really nice to see everybody come out for this. I just tell you a little bit about my background. So I've been an activist for most of my life, concerned about the environment and peace and social justice, as my bio said. After spiritual development in my 20s, I went to rabbinical school, and I picked a tradition, a Reconstructionist tradition, as the smallest of the major denominations, and I picked it because it didn't force me to choose between my social conscience and my spiritual development. I think that they're both equally important for well-rounded religious life. I'm from New Jersey originally, but I married a Kansas City girl. So that's why I'm here. You could say I married well, I guess. And so I also tend to talk fast, so I know Kansans in particular do not like to call attention to themselves by asking me to talk more slowly. So if you make some sort of just a movement with your head or something if I'm talking too fast. So I am the director of Kansas Interfaith Power and Light, and in a few minutes I'll tell you what that means. I've had this job since March of 2011. So we have a threefold mission. I work in the faith community talking about clean energy and climate change, which you can imagine in Kansas was not the most accepted task over the last few years. And we've had sort of arguments about that, about whether we should even say the words climate change. But I'm pretty headstrong, and my philosophy on that was always, first of all, you can't deal with a problem if you won't say what it is. And second of all, the other thing about being a person of faith, sort of missionizing about this, sort of carrying this message, is that I feel like it's incumbent upon us as people of faith to speak the truth, even if it's not convenient. So I do go around to churches all over the state of Kansas, talking about this issue, and some of my presentation will be in the slides tonight. But if you want to know more about my organization, after we're finished tonight, I'll be right on the table over here. We have some literature and some programs, and I have a mailing list. So if you want more information, I'm happy to share it with you. So I come from a scriptural tradition, so I'm going to start at the beginning. Begin at the beginning. So as you know from your Bible studies, there are two creation stories in the book of Genesis. So the first one is Elohim blessed them and said to them, Elohim is the Hebrew name of God, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth. So this is the one where the people who think that you should just stick a straw in the earth and use that it's here for us to use it up, that's the scripture that they rely on. Because the word master is kivush, it's actually the same word as occupation, and it means, you're in charge, essentially. So this is the one where that people who don't take climate change seriously rely on that. But then there's a second one. As you know, there's two stories. So the second story, Adonai Elohim took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. So that's, in Hebrew, that's Laudato Si, to work it, to guard it, to watch over it. This is a stewardship issue. So if you have a factory or a piece of land and you hire somebody to watch over it, you want to take a profit from it, but you don't want them to use up the productive value of the land right away. So that's what this one means. God wants us to watch over the land. In some ways, these two texts mitigate each other, comment on each other. So we have the right, and even some would say the responsibility, to take care of ourselves from the bounty of the earth, but we also have the obligation to take care of it and to make sure that it stays productive over the course of time, and that God cares about that. Am I speaking okay? All right. As for me, I am going to establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living thing being in your care, the birds, the beasts, and all the land animals in your care, all who have gone out of the ark, all earth's animals. So what is this? What story is this from? Noah. Okay. So he's making God. This is God speaking, and he's making a covenant. Who is he making the covenant with? Noah and his descendants and every living being. So covenant, right? So I think there's 5 covenant texts in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scripture. And this is the first one, and it's not simply a covenant with humankind, it's a covenant with creation. Right? So think about what a covenantal relationship is. It's a mutually responsible relationship. So we have responsibilities to God, God has responsibilities to us. But it's not just us, it's creation. So actually, the slide that's not in here is John 3:16, which says, God so loved the world. And the word world in the Greek there is cosmos, not anthropos, which means it's about the entire created order, not simply humankind. So God is in a covenantal relationship, a mutually responsible relationship with creation. And now I think I can pause here.
We're going to tag team a little bit today, and I'm going to pick up from that thought on sacred scripture, and that's exactly, of course, where we share this idea of covenant. It's also where Pope Francis, by the way, got the concept he said in front of the UN about the environment having rights. You know, we usually talk in terms of humanity and human persons having rights, and of course we do, but there's a sense you can talk about the whole cosmos having rights. Does anybody, by this time, is everyone aware why Pope Francis chose Francis as his name? You know, it's one of these quotations I love to pull out because it's sometimes I'm surprised how many Catholics in particular don't know why Francis chose Francis. And he told the whole world, at least the press, the day after he chose the name. And the reason he did so is there was a lot of speculation in the press because he's Jesuit. They thought, oh, he must be naming himself after Francis Xavier, you know, because Jesuits would look at Francis Xavier, or maybe because he's loves journalists so much, the journalists thought maybe Francis de Sales, the patron of journalists. But it wasn't that. Of course, it was Francis of Assisi that he chose the name for. This is what he said when asked about this. Some people wanted to know why the Bishop of Rome wished to be called Francis. Some thought of Francis Xavier, Francis de Sales, and also Francis of Assisi. I will tell you the story. During the election, I was seated next to the Archbishop Emeritus of São Paulo, a good friend indeed. When things were looking dangerous, he encouraged me. I like that. When things were looking dangerous, he encouraged me. And when the votes reached 2/3, there was the usual applause because the Pope had been elected. And he gave me a hug and a kiss and said, "Don't forget the poor." And those words came to me, the poor, the poor. Then right away, thinking of the poor, I thought of Francis of Assisi. Then I thought of all the wars as the votes were still being counted till the end. Francis is also the man of peace. That is how the name came into my heart. Francis of Assisi. For me, he is the man of poverty, the man of peace, the man who loves and protects creation. These days, we don't have a very good relationship with creation, do we? He is the man who gives us this spirit of peace, the poor man. How I would like a church which is poor and for the poor. So Francis, right from the beginning of his pontificate, was thinking about the link between poverty, war and peace, and the environment in the person of Francis of Assisi. And as you're going to see as Rabbi and I go on, we're both of the opinion that the first to be affected by environmental degradation is always the poor. And the ones that are hurt the most are the poor. So there's a link between the two. And this is seen right at the very heart of the message of sacred scripture from both of our traditions. I lose things. My staff knows that, so I better keep it close at hands. All right. So, looking at this from... All right. No, that's right back. Did I do something wrong? We went back twice. Okay. There we go. All right. There he is. In the covenant scriptures that the Rabbi made reference to, we go back to the beginning of it all. And of course, at the beginning of it all, when I say this to my class, they always go, creation is the beginning of it all. But in both of our traditions, before there was creation, there was God. And God wanted to share God's self with others, and so he created. It's a free act of creation. He created. People usually think about the creation. Great art here. We have Donnelly, stick figures for you and for I. Most people think of creation in terms of the creation of the human person. But as we know, that wasn't the beginning of his creation, right? My first degree is in physics, so when I go back to the beginning of it all, always, because people know I did physics, they always want to go back to the Big Bang. And I always say, well, no, there was something before the Big Bang. I like to refer to God as the Big Banger. Who brought it all. But if we're right with modern physics, it took, depending on which theory you take, somewhere around 13.4 billion years to get to the point of creation of humanity. God created before that. I'll talk about the arrows in a second. There it is. The cosmos. Now we spell cosmos with the C. Of course, if we went to our biblical roots and look at it in our tradition of Hebrew and in the Koine Greek that I read it in, it was cosmos would be with a K. The idea is he created the entire cosmos, everything that is. Immediately I go into my Carl Sagan mode, for those of you who are old enough to remember Carl Sagan. All the stars, billions and billions of them. All of that he created. And when he created it, it was in harmony with God. And in harmony at the crown of his creation. After all those billions of years, when everything was ready, he created us in his image and likeness, male and female, he created us. He created us out of love for love. Created us out of relationship for relationship. He created us for himself, for God's self. But he also created us for one another. So there was harmony between the creative couple as is depicted in those Genesis stories that the Rabbi made reference to. And there was harmony between the male and the female, but there was harmony between the male and female, the original human community, and God. And internal to the human person, and what theologians call original integrity, there was harmony inside the human person. The will, the intellect, the will, the emotions, they lined up in a way that they don't currently line up. I came into this room and saw the wonderful cookies back there in the back, and I wanted to become one with the cookies. Now, my doctor has told me there's too much of Monsignor, and too much cookies is not a good idea, but I still wanted to become one because my emotions are not in line with my intellect. But at the beginning of all, there was a harmony internal to the human person, each and every person. And there was harmony between God's human creation and that cosmos. This is what theologians call original justice. This original harmony. There's those four harmonies between God and the human community, between members of the human community, each person in harmony with him or herself, and the human community in harmony with subpersonal creation, the earth or cosmos to be more inclusive. This is how it was at the beginning before the fall, before sin entered the world and disrupted the harmonies that God intended from the beginning. In the midst of this harmonies, we had that particular role to be God's stewards. Now that's a very important term for me because my first name, Stuart, is the Scottish version of steward. All right? It's what the name means because the stewardship was such an important role in medieval Scotland, where my name comes from, that they named people as stewards. It was an honorable position to have. The way I spell it meant that my ancestors were head stewards, which is why I'm probably a Monsignor. But when sin entered the world, sin disrupted the harmony that God had created. It disrupted the harmony between the human community and God. And many, many theologians talk a great deal about that disrupted harmony between us and God. And in both of our traditions, we believe God took the initiative to overcome that disharmony. But religion and faith are about a lot more than just the restoration of that relationship. It is through the restoration of that relationship that we should be able to restore all the harmonies that were disrupted by sin. We should be able to live in harmony with one another again. In the Christian tradition, we talk using two Old Testament passages about the two commands of love of God and love of neighbor, drawing, as our teacher Jesus did, from the rabbinical text about love of neighbor as well as love of God. That harmony should be there. That harmony between us and ourselves. Many, many priests, many, many rabbis, many, many pastors and souls talk about the need to allow grace to heal the inner disharmony that exists. But there's also the harmony with subpersonal creation, the earth. That too needs to be restored. It's part of God's original intent that we live in harmony with the earth, and we take that proper role of stewardship and properly understood dominion. Not doing whatever we want with God's creation, but using God's creation in accordance with its original purpose. Now I have to give you a hint. I'm going to go back one. The split between liberals and conservatives, you may have heard about that split. The split between conservatives or traditionalists and progressives in every religious group I know is right here in these four harmonies. Because unfortunately, humans being as we are affected by sin, we have a tendency to not want to include everything and everyone, partly because including everything and everyone is a very daunting task. And so we have a tendency to divide up complex reality into smaller segments. And those who have a tendency to be conservative, it may be a personality thing, it may be their religious upbringing or their family upbringing, they tend to emphasize relationship number 1 and relationship number 3. I know people who are conservative here are going to yell at me that I use the odd numbers for conservatives, but I did. All right? They have a tendency to emphasize the importance of relationship with God. They have a tendency to emphasize the importance of that relationship helping to heal the individual. So priests like myself will talk about confession and spiritual direction, Eucharistic adoration, and having a personal spiritual life of depth and substance, and a personal relationship with God. All good stuff. But they have a tendency, when doing that, not to talk that much about relationships 2 and 4. Now, the more liberal or progressive among us will have a tendency to emphasize our relationships between other members of the human community. Even the Christian scriptures are clear about this. How do you say you love the God you do not see if you do not love the neighbor you do see? Right? And so emphasize the importance it is to love one another. See those people, how they love one another. That's supposed to be a witness to our faith. And of course, they're right to do so. And of course, this tradition also has a tendency to emphasize what we're talking about tonight, the importance of our harmony with subpersonal creation. And they are right to do so. But all of us need to work to be inclusive of all 4 relationships, partly because I don't believe you can do one without the other, but partly because if we're going to be successful in any of them, we have to be successful in all of them. So that is there from the very beginning. And to ignore our obligation and living in harmony with creation is to do a disservice to any religion that calls itself rooted in the biblical tradition of Judaism or Christianity.
And we'll conclude this section with this beautiful line from Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that it holds, the world and its inhabitants. So the question, moving away from this. So the question is, how are we doing with this?
Rabbi, if I could just there, because we were talking about it at dinner, we didn't put it on the slides. I thought it was wonderful in our traditions. We both, in our worship, pray that prayer in the sense that, like for us, the Eucharist, for yourselves in celebrating Passover and your Seder meals, blessed are you, Lord God of all creation. That's part of our, we believe as we pray. So it's a beautiful part of that tradition. This is how we pray and refer to God.
So the question is, how are we doing with this? And the answer is not very well, in a number of different ways, and these are some of the different ways. This one is a coal plant, just a regular old coal plant. The one on the right is what the tar sands look like, the boreal forest after it's de-tar sanded. That used to be a forest. This is an oil train that blew up, which is happening more and more as we transport things that way. And that's the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico several years ago. Now I want to take a few moments here to talk to you a little bit about the science of climate change. About 150 years ago, there was a physicist who theorized that actually carbon dioxide is the thing that keeps this planet habitable. There's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere which keeps the temperature warm. It's called the greenhouse effect. It allows life to develop. But as more carbon dioxide is put into the atmosphere, the temperature gets warmer. It's actually basic physics. So concentrations of CO2 since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution are 40% higher than they were before, and that is leading to an increase in temperature. And then temperatures have risen about 0.8 degrees, that's Celsius, so it's about a degree and a half Fahrenheit over the past 100 years, and are likely to rise a further 2 to 4.5 degrees Celsius, again, by 2100. So that's a chart. This is the CO2, the blue one's the CO2, and the red one is the temperature. So current international panel on climate change has determined that global temperatures are higher than they've been over the last 1,800 years. And they can do this with various measurements, such as they can go down into the ice and pull ice cores, and they can see what the carbon and what the temperature was in past years. There's other ways that they can do that, and they look all over the world. And a recent study from Oregon State University said temps are warmer than any time in the past 4,000 years. So that one's not been peer-reviewed yet, but it was in the New York Times. So I feel okay about the data now. And then there's been this talking point lately about whether it's been warm since 1998. But if you go to last year, sorry, go back. Never mind, I was taking it out. Last year, 2014 was the hottest year on record since 1880, since measurements started in 1880, and 2015 will be hotter. So just June, July, and August worldwide is the hottest summer that we've ever had. 2014 was the hottest year that we've ever had, and 2015 will likely surpass it. So I want to stop here for a moment and ask anybody who has any questions about this. Now, I'm not a climate scientist, but I have looked into it pretty extensively. So if you have any questions about this or things that you've heard that you want to ask me about, now's your chance. That's the difference between a sermon and a conversation. Is if I'm sermonizing, you don't get to talk back, but in this case, you do get to talk back. So go ahead, give me all your Fox News talking points. Yeah.
So my understanding is people on the right of the Republicans are most concerned because of the solutions they're proposed. They don't like the solutions, and so therefore they deny science.
Well, that's the way I would interpret it. Yeah. Because the question is, how do we solve the problem, which I'm going to get into in a moment, about how to address this problem. But I definitely want to talk. Does anybody have any questions about the science part before we move on? Yeah.
How direct is the relationship between the CO2 content in the atmosphere and global temperature?
It's pretty direct. Go back to the previous slide. Go to the other one, more previous. That one. So what happens is it lags. So carbon goes into the atmosphere and the temperature doesn't rise immediately. It takes a while. It takes about 15 or 20 years before the temperature catches up to the amount of carbon. So that's why even if we stopped putting carbon into the atmosphere now, we would still have about 2 degrees because there's stuff in the pipeline that hasn't been felt yet. The 4.5, and actually I think it's probably a little higher than this now, is if we don't do anything about it. We continue to add, we'll continue to see warming. But if we stopped right now, there'll still be a lag when we begin to bring the curve in. All right, let's go forward. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay. So the overall impact. So the difference between the term climate change and the term global warming. Global warming is the temperature goes up because of the carbon in the atmosphere, but climate change is actually a more accurate term because it causes problems that are not directly related, to the warming. So these are some of the problems. So species die off. We're seeing a lot of species dying off right now. Sea level rise. This happens both because of melting ice and because water expands when it gets hotter. Increase in extreme weather events. Freshwater scarcity. So one of the ways this happens is, and this is what's happening in Brazil right now. I have a slide about Brazil in a moment. If people drink glacial melt, so the glaciers melt, and that's the water source. If it gets warmer, then the glaciers melt faster. So first you have flooding, and then you don't have drinking water. So a lot of the flooding in Pakistan that you've seen recently is due to this phenomenon. Also, extreme weather events in India over the summer, there was a very strong heat wave. A couple of thousand people died. So these are the kind of things. A lot of places don't have air conditioning. Even Western Europe doesn't really have air conditioning. So if it gets very hot there, people are less able to withstand it. Disease factor shifts. That means that the mosquitoes move north, right? Or if they don't die off. We'll see something about that in a minute. The diseases will go to places where people are less habituated to them. Reduced agricultural yields because the arability of the land is directly related. You lose these microbial organisms if it gets too hot. And climate refugees, which is a big, climate refugees is a pressing issue in the 21st century, and actually the national security apparatus in this country are very concerned about this. You see what's happening with the refugees from Syria and how overwhelming the problem is to Western Europe. Can you imagine what would happen if hundreds of thousands of people from sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia can't live where they live anymore and are forced to try to move to better environments? It's going to lead to a lot of problems. Bangladesh is, I think, half of the people who live in Bangladesh live within 3 meters of sea level, and India does not want them. So India built a big fence around Bangladesh to keep people from coming in. So you get somebody who loses their fresh water supply or their arable land, and they try to go someplace else, the people next door might not want them. And that's what leads to instability, or what we're seeing in Europe, which is really only, honestly, the tip of the iceberg. These are just some impacts on climate change. So I mentioned this in, this is Brazil. Interannual water supply variability. So you can see that extremely high variability leading to more drought. This is the polar ice cap, 1980, and then 2012. Now this is both an effect and a cause of climate change, and let me explain to you how that works. So when you've got this nice big patch of white here, when the sun comes down, it bounces off the white and goes back into space, so it moderates the temperature. But if you've got a lot of black here, because it's melting because the temperature's hotter, then the rays of the sun get absorbed in the sea, and it causes further melting. So it's both a cause and an effect. That's what we call a feedback loop. This isn't earlier, that was the one I wanted. You can go online. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This is just July 25. There's one of these for every month. And then the one at the end of the year is very impressive. So these are all kind of climate anomalies. These are things that are contributed to. No single incident is caused by climate change, but many incidences are exacerbated by climate change. It's hard to see a weather event right now that's not strengthened by climate change in one way or another. So here's a couple of examples. In the West, they've had wildfires. You've probably heard a lot about that, and a drought in California. In Washington State, there's a new temperate rainforest that had a fire in it this summer, which is extremely unusual because it's usually too wet to burn. But because it's dry there now, the temperate rainforest burns. There's a drought in Sao Paulo I was mentioning. Arctic sea ice extend 9.5% below. Typhoons, warmer than average conditions. I mean, you can see, you can look this up. You can just say climate anomalies for any month or for any year, and NOAA has a list of them. So this is just an example of what we can see happening even now. And this is a report in Nature some years ago. She's a biologist, so she was talking about biodiversity. But she said that even with the moderate amount of temperature increase that we've seen so far, we're seeing profound effects on the world system. So if you're seeing this already at 0.8, what are you going to see at 1.5 or 2.5 or, God forbid, 3.5? What kind of changes are you going to see then? We're already seeing such profound changes. It's really frightening to think what we might see in the next 100 years. Now, I want to talk about the moral issue. The reason I talk about this in faith communities is because let me put it to you as quickly, as clearly as I can. So Christians in particular have spent a lot of time and a lot of money doing what they call mission work in the developing world. Education and healthcare are nothing but nets. There's some women religious in here. Some of you probably served overseas. Those people are the people who stand to be hurt the most by this issue. They have the least responsibility for causing the problem because they have the smallest carbon footprint, but they have the most to lose and the least ability to deal with the problem. Now, here in Kansas, in America, we're blessed. We get to turn on the air conditioner if it gets too hot. We have access to fresh water. Other places are not so lucky. And so not to put too fine a point on it, we are the cause of their distress. And that is a moral responsibility. And there's another quote from Scripture here. Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And I believe that was a Jewish guy who said that. And now we have the Holy Father saying, coming out with a very strong statement on this, really putting it as plainly as possible, both in terms of the economic issue and in terms of the environmental justice issue. Environmental justice and economic justice are linked, and saying that we have a moral responsibility, speaking to the moral responsibility, the moral imperative to deal with this issue for the sake of creation, which we're in relationship with, and for the sake of those who are going to suffer, essentially, for our sins.
Thank you. So Francis comes along. We saw a picture of Pope Francis, and he continues tradition, which actually in its modern form began with his predecessor by two, St. John Paul II. John Paul II, in January 1st, 1990, in a very important statement on the World Peace Day, challenged the pro-life movement in the Catholic Church, which is pretty strong, by saying to them, you cannot be authentically pro-life unless you are pro the environment. That statement was one of those statements that was more listened to, nodded, and ignored than actually acted upon. But what the Holy Father had laid out is it's not good enough to save the lives of humans if we destroy the environment in which they have to exist, where, as the Acts of the Apostles would put it, where we live and move and have our being. And so part of this is a tradition that is building in the church. Benedict XVI came along and made a commitment. The first head of state to do this. Grant you, his state was much smaller than most, but he made the commitment to make the Vatican city-state, as a ruler of a city-state, carbon neutral. And he achieved that before he handed over the reins to Francis, who continues that tradition. So he just flew to Cuba and to the United States. All the flights that he did on what they call Shepherd 1 will be offset with planting of trees and other things they do. If you've gone to the Vatican recently, you'll see all these solar panels that have been placed on the roofs of the buildings that make up the Vatican City-State. So the Vatican City-State is achieved is a small goal and a small achievement, but an example to take seriously what we've been preaching. And now we see Francis in his person making this a major, if not the major, emphasis of his pontificate. Right? We have this wonderful encyclical letter, and of course a lot of the traditionalists get upset because they say he didn't title it in Latin. You know, Laudato Si, that's Italian. You know, praise be from Francis's hymn. How dare he? Of course, I say that radical Pope, Pope Pius XII, was the last to name an encyclical in Italian. So it's not that it's not in our tradition to do so. But in Laudato Si, the Holy Father really challenges Catholics in particular, but all men and women of goodwill who share this vision with us, to change our lifestyles. Especially those who are from the richest part of humanity. And I just chose 2 paragraphs from this long document. We have made copies available to you for free. We appreciate if you take one to please read it. We're going to, the ones that are left, we're going to share with our students. But we want everyone to read the Holy Father's words, so this is one way to make it available to you. But in paragraph 209 of the document, he's talking here in 209, 210, 211, he's talking about creating what he calls ecological citizenship, to see ourselves as part of the cosmos and to be good citizens as part of that community. And he says in paragraph 209, an awareness of the gravity of today's cultural and ecological crisis must be translated into new habits. Now, the term crisis is interesting. My nephew is a scholar of Mandarin Chinese, and I asked him to verify this for me. I'd heard it before, but I wanted to make sure it was true. That in Chinese, the way you make the character for crisis is you bring together 2 other characters. The character for danger and the character for opportunity. A moment of crisis is a moment of danger, but it's also a moment of opportunity if we're willing to seize the moment. And the Holy Father is saying it is an ecological crisis that must be. Didn't say, it'd be nice if you do this. He said it must be translated into new habits. This is in the Catholic moral tradition of talking about virtues. A virtue is a good habit, right? And that's opposed to a vice, which is a bad habit. Many people know that our current progress and the mere amassing of things and pleasures are not enough to give meaning and joy to the human heart. Yet they feel unable to give up what the market sets before them. In those countries which should be making the greatest changes in consumer habits, because we're consuming the most. I did a little checking today. It's been a while since I've done economics as a discipline. But just in the area of energy, just use that one example. In the United States, the average person in the United States consumes as much energy as 2 Japanese. They live pretty well. One person in the United States consumes as much energy as 6 Mexicans. How about our biggest economic competitor, China? One American consumes the energy equivalent to 13 Chinese. And you can all the way go down to a country like Tanzania, where I have many friends, many priest friends from my training. The average American uses 307 times the energy of the average Tanzanian. We are consuming the most, so we have the most obligations to change. The greatest change the consumer has, young people, fortunately, have a new ecological sensitivity and a generous spirit. And some of them are making admirable efforts to protect the environment. At the same time, they have grown up in a milieu of extreme consumerism and affluence, which makes it difficult to develop other habits. We are faced with an educational challenge. Next slide, please. I was talking to the Rabbi at dinner about Jim Wallace from Sojourners. When I was a seminarian, I worked with his group in Washington, D.C., and he gave a speech to us to work with them. He had just seen on a bumper sticker in the rich part of the suburbs of Maryland, around D.C., a woman driving to the mall with a bumper sticker on her late model expensive car that said, "I shop, therefore I am." I call going to a mall being mauled. You go to a mall and we are enticed into buying things we don't really need. That's how malls work, by the way. If you only bought what you need, malls would go broke. But when you go to a mall to get something, the mall inundates your senses. Right? You go to buy a pair of shoes, and of course the one shoe store is on the lower level on one side, and the other shoe store is on the second level on the far side. So you have to walk through the mall to be good consumer price comparer shoppers, good captains. And as you walk through, they maul you. They entice you. Flashing lights, the bookstore that I can never get by, the coffee, the cinnamon coffee, and the cinnamon buns. The record playing the latest song, the flashy model pictures of the latest styles. What they want you to do is, you went there for shoes, but they want you to come out having consumed a mass amount of calories. You know, each and every day, Americans consume 20 billion more calories than we need. 20 billion a day. Enough to feed 80 million people around the world. Isn't that amazing? Right? And you come out with stuff we don't need. That's how malls work. But we are consuming at a rate that is unsustainable, morally and ecologically. It's not making us happier either. So environmental education, we're an educational institution, that's why I'm emphasizing these paragraphs, has broadened its goals. Whereas in the beginning it was mainly centered on scientific information, consciousness raising, and the prevention of environmental risks. That's how I was brought up in the Earth movement. We walked to school one day in the 70s. You have to be real old like me to remember that. Didn't do any good, the buses still ran, but it was a statement that we were, aware of this. But it's more than just that now. It tends not to include a critique of the myths of modernity grounded in a utilitarian mindset. And here's the list. Individualism, unlimited progress, competition, consumerism, the unregulated market. It seeks also to restore the various levels of ecological equilibrium, establishing harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature and other living creatures, and with God. You see the 4 harmonies that the Holy Father is making explicit reference to. Environmental education should facilitate making the leap towards the transcendent, which gives ecological ethics its deepest meaning. It needs educators capable of developing ethics of ecology and helping people through effective pedagogy to grow in solidarity, responsibility, and compassionate care. Elsewhere, the Holy Father calls this an ethos of receptivity. To see creation as a gift. And of course, when you receive a gift, what's the first response to receiving a gift? Gratitude, thanksgiving. And the next step, of course, I remember this well, I was 6 years old. I wanted a particular toy for Christmas, and my parents did not have the money to get me that toy. But I really wanted that toy. And sure enough, Christmas morning came along, and there it was. I'm sure they went into debt to get it for me. And after the end of the day, having played with it all day, I went up to Mom and Dad and said, how can I ever thank you for this? I knew even at 6 that they couldn't afford it. And they said, never get these words. My dad said them, but he said, your mom and I, all we want is that you use it as it was meant to be used. And that you take care of it. What a great lesson that Mom and Dad gave me at 6. And that's what God says to us about creation. I want you to enjoy it. Use it as it was meant to be used and take care of it. It's seeing that creation is the greatest gift, other than our very lives that God has given us. And we're not separate from creation, we're part of creation, so our lives are part of it all. And that's what the Holy Father is emphasizing in this encyclical letter, to learn and be able to grasp how we live that ethos of receptivity, recognizing that everything is gift.
There are two major ways to address climate change. One is by stopping putting more stuff into the atmosphere, and the other one is by addressing the changes that are already in the pipeline. So I'm going to focus mostly on the mitigation right now. Adaptation I'm not going to talk too much about, although I'm happy to ask some questions about it later on. Three main ways to do mitigation is efficiency, distributed energy, which is like solar panels on your house, or renewables on a utility scale, like wind farms, and hydro and that sort of thing. Now, energy efficiency is really the low-hanging fruit in our economy. So 150 years ago, we discovered that if we burnt coal, we could boil water to make steam, to turn turbines, to generate electricity. And 150 years later, in the state of Kansas, 60% of our energy is generated by burning coal to boil water, to make steam, to turn turbines. But it's an inefficient way of producing energy, because what else does it produce besides besides the energy? Steam, garbage, mercury, right, soot, carbon. All these things are not the reason why it's being burned. So it's a very inefficient form, and we're still using it. Cars are the same way. Cars are also not efficient, internal combustion engines, because there's a lot of moving parts in there. Electric cars don't have so much stuff, that's why they're more efficient. Because they produce the cars produce the light bulb, the incandescent light bulb produces things that are not for the purpose. Right? So I think the statistic I saw is that over 50% of the energy that we use is wasted in this country. So by really doing a giant scale efficiency project on our economy, we could really lower the amount of energy that we even need. Demand would come down. It would mean less emissions. It would be cheaper, because the cleanest and cheapest watt is the watt you don't use. And it would also provide jobs. And this is also, I'm going to make the same point in when we talk about distributed, so I'll make it now. If you decided that you were going to put efficiency and distributed energy a major priority, let's say here in Kansas City, those jobs can't be outsourced. The people who do those jobs could be local people. They'd be shopping in your stores, and filling up at your gas stations, paying taxes, right? These things, they can't be outsourced to China. They can't be brought in as wildcatters. They have to be done by people here. And that's something that really could support the economy in a place like Kansas City, where jobs are so important and so scarce. In renewable energy, especially in wind and solar also, there's a great potential in Kansas. Renewables are, once you put the infrastructure up, they're free. Wind is free once you put the turbines up. They don't pollute. You know what happens when there's an accident on a solar farm? It's a sunny day. And renewables are not under the control of foreign governments, and you don't have to send the Navy out to keep the Straits of Hormuz open to get your wind. I put an asterisk next to freely available because everybody always asks me about variability. That variability means it's not always sunny and it's not always windy. But what happens now is that coal plants don't always work, nuclear plants certainly don't always work, but what happens is there's a grid, and everything is integrated. So there's somebody who's sitting in a space-age control room where they say, if this plant isn't working, then we'll take the power from over here. We can do the same thing. Once the transmission is where it needs to be, most of our transmission doesn't go where it needs to go in order to incorporate utility scale wind, but once the infrastructure is built, then they can do the same thing and say, well, if it's not windy over here, we know it's going to be windy over here. And the larger the pool is, the easier it is to do that. Now, there's other things people can do, both as individuals and as communities. So we're going to talk a little bit about what individuals can do. Get rid of the beer fridge. You don't need it. Right? It's old, it's inefficient, and there's only 1 6-pack in there anyway, so you might as well just bring it. Right? Buy used, buy local, buy from your friends who make soap instead of going to the supermarket to buy soap. Drive less, walk or bike more. In Kansas City, you can actually do that. Right? Even though we don't have great public transportation, we still have the capacity to ride our bikes. Lower your carbon footprint, eat local, eat less processed. Take a Sabbath. This is one of my favorites, particularly because it's in the 10 Commandments. I tend to rate them that way. So if you spend Sunday, or in my case Saturday, at synagogues, church, having family time, being outside, reading, playing cards with your friends, not buying stuff, and not doing a lot of driving, then that's 1/7 of your life that you wouldn't be on the hamster wheel of consumerism, right? And it's so much less, because so much of our, as Monsignor pointed out, so much of our emissions are based on consumerism, materialism, that this would really have a huge impact. If everybody did this, I think our problems would be solved. And then put an installation, put solar on your house, all that kind of stuff. Keep going. Talk about this issue. Make sure that you talk about this issue. Write letters to the editor. Put it on your Facebook page. Letters to the editor was a thing that used to be in newspapers for young people. Newspapers. You old people write letters to the editor. Young people put it on your. Well, actually, I guess young people don't do Facebook either. So what do? Snapchat. Talk about. What's the app that you guys use for talking to each other? Snapchat. Did you say Facebook? All right. Really get young people following you on Facebook. I'd like to talk to your elected officials. 75% of people talk about climate change, never or rarely. These are the 3-part mission of Kansas Interfaith Power and Light. The first one is houses of worship, helping houses of worship do energy efficiency in their spaces and in the homes of their community, of their members. So here we see a guy putting in solar light bulbs. This is Prairie Village. These are flat solar panels, so Prairie Village, you're not allowed to see anything from the street. So that's why they still work, even though they're less efficient. In Kansas City, I think you could probably put the real ones up. This is a church at Lindsborg, Gary's been to. This is a geothermal heat pump. So it's piped in the ground, and they push this liquid through the pipes in the ground, and it keeps the ambient temperature of the building to a certain middle ground. So instead of heating from 0 to 65, you're heating from 50 to 65. And then Kansas, so we do 3 things. We help houses of worship do energy efficiency. We preach and teach about the faith basis of environmental stewardship, which is what I'm doing now. And we do that from different programs that we have, and I can tell you more about that there. And then we also advocate on the public policy level. Next slide, please. Advocate on the public policy level for policies that support clean energy and move away from fossil fuels. So these are some examples. We had a clergy petition in support of the Clean Power Plan, which is the EPA regs that are supposed to lower carbon emissions by 32% by 2030. That's actually a big issue because in Kansas, the politicians in Kansas don't believe in climate change. So we're going to be believe in. I never say believe in. Believe in is like, don't accept the science of climate change. It's not a religion. I'm Jewish. Right? And he's Catholic. And acceptance of the science of climate change is endemic to both of our traditions. But we're going to have this conversation again. This was a major march. I don't think we get much coverage here, but this was a major march in New York last year. 400,000 people marched in New York to demand climate action from the UN, and this is the And then the other thing is I want to put Monsignor on the spot a little bit. So we talked about the climate, we talked about the carbon footprint of the Vatican, and he's going to talk about the carbon footprint of Donnelly College. But the other piece of this is there's a lot of money invested in fossil fuels, right? In mutual funds, in retirement funds. There's a lot of money invested in fossil fuels. And there's a big movement now to try to divest money from funds that have fossil fuels. There's a big financial problem here because the valuation of oil companies in particular is based on the value of the resources if they were to be exploited. So resources that they know are there, but they have not mined, have not drilled yet, are counted as assets on their balance sheet. But if they were to drill all that stuff, the planet would be a little piece of crispy. You cannot use all of that value and still have a habitable planet. So there's going to be a lot of lost valuation there, one way or the other. We put a price on carbon, it's going to affect the share price. So not only is it a moral issue to get your funding out of fossil fuels, but it's also good fiscal stewardship because eventually these companies are going to take a pretty big hit when we act on this effectively. So the Catholic Church is reputed to have resources.
You can fool some of the people some of the time.
Whether it does or not, I don't know. But if it does, I'm sure it has some. It should not be, especially with the Pope saying what he's saying. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to say this is a moral issue and we need to address this issue, then get your money, your institutional money. Donnelly College's, putting you on the spot, Donnelly College's institutional money should come out of fossil fuels and be invested in clean, renewable, safe, and plentiful sources of energy, such as that we have here in Kansas. Okay, I got a little bit more. Sorry, I got a good place to stop, but I didn't stop. Materialism, Monsignor mentioned materialism. So a lot of this is based on, so I bought something, And then this is, I kind of envision a future where our self-worth is not based on the stuff that we come home with, but it's based on the relationships we build and the people that we support. And we've got to move towards this economy because the corporations and the government are not going to save us anymore. Those days are over. We need to save ourselves. And one of the ways that we can do that is by supporting community and supporting people and building our own cooperatives and investing in ourselves, building our own farms, building our own cooperatives that put solar panels on houses. That's the vision of the future. And that's the world that we want to build because the world that we're building, that we built now is broken. And we've got to start to build a new world. So you know the butterfly effect? So the chaos theory says that, actually, should I do this at the conclusion? You want to say something else?
No, go ahead.
Okay. When a butterfly flaps its wings, it can be felt all over the world, across the world, right? That's chaos theory. So we're all butterflies. All these things are going on at the same time. So we say, well, how can I do something? I'm just one person. How can I do something to address climate change? Well, many, many people are addressing this. We've got a lot of things going on. We've got divestment. We've got Laudato Si. We've got policy. We've got protest. We've got international agreement. We've got renewable energy. Right? All of these things are happening all at the same time, and every one of them has an effect that we can't even predict what it is. So each and every one of us, when we take one of these steps, we're a butterfly. So okay, be a butterfly. Be a butterfly. Everybody, be a butterfly. Right? We can't even know what effect this is going to have. We're all butterflies. And this is the information about how to get in touch with me. I do have information over here, so see me after the talk. So, okay.
I'll open it to questions. I just want to say, because the Rabbi challenged me about the disinvestment. We have a pretty good history in the Catholic Church of looking at ethical investment. I remember about the time I was becoming Catholic, and we were doing the economic pastoral and the peace pastoral in the 80s. There was a lot of work to divest from munitions companies. and there was a lot of work to take our money out of certain pharmaceutical companies, the ones that made the pharmaceuticals used in the death penalty, and things that also with the life issues that we have a history of doing this, and it was a constructive way of targeting issues. This is a good challenge, and actually I don't think it's something that the Holy Father mentioned in the Laudato Si directly, so it's a good thing to think about. He did mention a lot in the same paragraph I quoted from 211, I made reference to. He did talk about, in talking about the real changes in lifestyle, some of the things, he said some of the simple things we can start with, like avoiding the use of plastic and paper, reducing water consumption, separating refuge, cooking only what can reasonably be consumed, showing care for other living beings, using public transport, as he himself did, or carpooling for years and years as Archbishop in Buenos Aires, planting trees, turning off unnecessary lights. The list goes on throughout 211. It's just small, practical places to start. So I think that's, there's a lot of overlap there. Let's take questions. We've been double teaming you now for a while. Yes, sister?
This is not a question.
Give me the mic, sir.
This is not a question. This is my experience about the beginnings of Donnelly College. And my great aunt was the Mother Superior, and Sister Jerome had just gotten her PhD in Catholic University. When Bishop Donnelly offered a building to our community, he thought it was going to be a home for the aged. He offered it also to the Sisters of Charity in Leavenworth. Well, our sisters answered yes in the morning. The Sisters of Charity answered yes in the afternoon, so we know who got it. But Sister Jerome had just come back, and she said, well, there are community colleges. So Donnelly was the first Catholic community college. And Mother Lucy said, yes, those immigrant people in Kansas City, Kansas, they deserve the best. So between her and Sister Jerome, they picked some of the best teachers from our women's college in Atchison. And they came here and started Donnelly in '49. Some of the people who went to Donnelly in those early years were my friends. I was in high school at the time, and Sister Jerome was my mother's major professor. So we did a lot, our family did a lot of things for the sisters because they didn't drive at that time when we did. But some of my friends were working, one of them was working at Milgram's, and Sister Jerome and Sister Kathleen would go shopping for groceries. And Sister Jerome would say to this young clerk, are you going to go to college? And she said, well, no, because I can't afford it. She said, I had to go to Manual High School because I couldn't afford a Catholic high school. We had too many, I think there were either 8 or 9 members in the family. Jerome said, you come and see me, we'll figure it out. So she went to see Sister Jerome, and she said, you can work in the afternoon, come to class in the morning, and $100 for the year. And then she did that for a number of people that were in the neighborhood or people that she would meet. She was really a go-getter. She would not take no for an answer.
I've noticed that about sisters.
But I'm very proud of the fact that our family had something to do, to help those sisters, including the time that our sisters at Donnelly had called a cab to take them to Union Station. Cab couldn't find them. So Jerome called me, and I had my driver's license by that time. She said, you have to get these sisters to that train station. So, okay, I went up and got them to the train station, but we got down to a street, and they said, oh, we're going to miss the train because we were right close to it, Union Station. So I looked left, I looked right, I didn't see any cherry tops or anything like that, so I went right through the red light and got them to the train on time. My first time I ever went through a red light.
And the beginning of your vocation as sister. Right. So, thank you, sister. Good to have you back here. How many years did you teach here?
35.
35 years. So, thank you.
I think the paragraph 210 that you spoke of is outstanding as far as the structure is concerned. It speaks in terms of environmental education. So you know where I'm coming from.
I think a lot of people might not, Richard. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Richard Maiden. I'm president of the NAACP. I'm also was the first black board member for the Kansas Sierra Club. So my involvement in the environmental world is very extensive. In our problem, I love the fact that you brought out that the Pope was concerned about concentrating on the poor. A lot of those states is what we call parts of my presentations now. Environmental literacy. I believe, and I'm sitting here now, in fact, I looked it up on my phone. There's a difference between environmental education and environmental literacy. And I think we'll find in the poor, especially I know in my community, we need to involve ourselves in more environmental literacy at this point to be able to create an environmental education system.
Thank you. I'll let the rabbi start with that. I think it's very good. One thing that I think we all know is that some of the, I think of the grandmothers that I saw, my grandmothers, and the ones in my community, you know, we used to can things. And there was a great understanding that this was a healthier way, as well as a more environmentally sensitive way. We didn't think of those terms back then, but you think of that tradition, that they have that literacy, it was second nature to my grandparents' generation. And quite frankly, it just became too easy to go to the grocery store. I think we have to start thinking back to that way of doing it. I know you're doing some of that work, that's why I mentioned that.
I'm saying. That is easy in our part. My concern on the literacy, the smoke that's rising up out of the plants. I mean, you know, people see that all the time. But to understand the nature of what that really is a totally different ballgame. It's not seen from the perspective. My friends, little class friends in California, I spent like about a month with them. And with all the talking I'm doing, they'll go, we know, but we just don't care. Well, see, that's our responsibility. We can't allow them not to care. We have to figure out a way to break through that.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, sir.
I had a question about the co-ops, as you mentioned. I know in Cleveland, there's the Greater Circle Initiative, the evergreen cooperatives that have been founded there to do different business activities. And I'm wondering how we could do something like that here. I know that what they do, I guess they build a couple of greenhouses to grow lettuce and herbs and stuff like that. And then they're also creating business to put on solar panels. But those are probably specific to.
Well, one of the things they did, so there's this series of co-ops in Cleveland, and one of the things that they did was they established a cooperative laundry, and then they went to the institutions in the town that were getting state and city funding. So the hospital and the university, and said, use us instead of some corporate whatever, and they were able to establish those relationships. I think that's something that we need to think about, absolutely, about how to do that.
How would we go about it?
That's a good question. We have to. I mean, we have to. We really have to start from figuring out who's going to support it, who's going to work in it, training people to have the right kind of training to do the work, making sure that we have access to capital, which would probably come from credit unions and some other cooperative.
Well, one thing to say, you know, if there were a case, something.
It's a little bit past my. I mean, it's a good topic. It's an important topic. That's a little bit past the parameters of this conversation, but it's certainly something that.
But good laws can help. I'll give you one example. I came from Mount St. Mary's University in Edinburgh, Maryland, before here. And the governor of Maryland and the legislature of Maryland passed a rule just saying, look, we have to be committed to renewable energy. So we'll say, if you're going to do business with the government, X percentage of your energy that you consume has to come from renewable sources. Well, the University of Maryland, which is one of the biggest parts of the government system, they didn't have the means to come up with renewable energy. Mount St. Mary's, we were sitting on a lot of property, and so there was a great cooperation between the state, the University of Maryland system, the local energy company, who wanted them to all be good customers, and Mount St. Mary's, and we took 117 acres of our property and turned it into a solar farm. It's one of the largest solar farms east of the Mississippi. It's on a university campus. But what a great opportunity to teach our students about renewable energy. We found that it was a little hard to go from the solar farm to teach about it, so we came up with a way that they pay attention to. We made recharging stations for their cell phones based on the solar energy. They took notice, And so we had a teaching opportunity. The state was getting renewable energy, even in a moderately northern climate like Northern Maryland is. And it was a win-win-win. But it wouldn't have happened if the state had required a small percentage, I don't remember the exact number, of the power coming from renewable sources. I think we can do things like that, small steps, that will lead to the kind of creative ingenuity of our environment, of our entrepreneurs to come up with ways to meet those needs. But we need the government framework that rewards being sensible. So one of the things that Pope calls it is intergenerational solidarity. What kind of we should have solidarity now. We're working on that. But we should also have solidarity going forward, and we need a handoff on Earth that's at least as good as what we received. So whatever we can come up with, creative ways that unleashes that creativity to be able to meet those needs in an economically or ecologically sound way and an economically sound way. One thing I would love to see is, the Marshall Plan is one of the things I studied closely when I learned undergraduate economics. The Marshall Plan worked for many reasons. That's an interesting economic story to tell. But it was the commitment of the country to rebuild Europe. Partly for selfish reasons, we needed customers for our goods, but partly just for the reasons that it was the right thing to do. Wouldn't it be beautiful if the United States had a Marshall Plan for renewable energy? Or how about the fact that we keep building cities and homes that are more and more and more spread out, rather than making it economically more feasible to come back and have what I grew up with in Pittsburgh, streetcars everywhere. People didn't have cars. You didn't need one. But you can't live in most major cities today without a car because you just don't have the public transport infrastructure. But if we went to the moon in 10 years, maybe we can again revitalize public transport, at least in our major urban areas. Then we can worry about others. Say things like that. But it takes the willpower of people to say, this is what we want, we demand. Yes?
So I'm new to the area, and a lot of this is going to take a lot of organization. I'm wondering if there are examples of resources to be hooked up with people who already are on these tracks, so you don't end up trying to start from scratch with
What kind of tracks?
We're talking about pushing for legislation for better public transportation or Marshall plans.
Yeah, I mean, there are people working on different aspects of this. I mean, on the state level, we're doing. The Sierra Club is a full-time lobbyist in Topeka. We have, but it's a very, Topeka's not forward-thinking about this kind of stuff. So we're always trying to. So that's why I kind of don't really rely. I mean, I live in a government milieu where people in government don't like government. So it's a kind of tough place to be. But so we're doing a lot of trying to hold the fort instead of really looking for positive policy.
But even on like the grassroots level, is there?
But look at the Clean Power Plan. I mean, that's going to lead to a lot of openings for some of this stuff because there's going to be a need for ways to lower our carbon emissions. So that's going to prioritize some of this stuff. I mean, we're working on it, but we're kind of fumbling our way through it. So if you want to get involved, then definitely give me your information and we'll get you involved.
Right.
You didn't mention the Koch brothers. And the Kansas legislature seems to be caught in a vice that keeps cycling itself and getting stronger. And there must be something we can do about that besides clap or butterfly wings. I mean, what do we do? How can we convince these people to accept the four harmonies?
Well, I think Mencken said that it's hard to get somebody to agree to something when his paycheck is dependent on not agreeing with it. That's the problem with the legislature, is that they've got money, and they're supported by people who have an economic interest in denying the reality of climate change. I mean, from an electoral point of view, we try every 2 years to turn some to do something about it. Well, as a Sierra Club, IBL is a 501c3, so we're agnostic when it comes to politics. But the Sierra Club has, some PAC and endorsements and what have you, That's one of the reasons why. I mean, I just think that even the national politics, I think Obama's doing what he can with the politics the way they are. You know, he's pushing it as far as he can go, but there's only so far he can go. And that's why I think that we need to start thinking about how we're going to do it without government and without reparations, because we're just not going to see the kind of, we're never going to have, we're not going to have the Marshall Plan and the domestic Marshall Plan. Those days are over. And either we just sort of say, well, the Koch brothers, oy vey the Koch brothers, and we sort of, wait for Armageddon, or we figure out something else out. And that's what we are right now. We're at the cusp of this huge paradigm shift, because the capitalism, social democracy argument is over. We need to figure out what the next step is and what the next thing is, and that's organizing ourselves. And I don't know, we're not there. Some people are doing work on that nationally. Locally, not so much. But, we're, he and I and a few of us and you are institutionally in a position where we can sort of move that conversation along. Believe me, going up to the Capitol and trying to get some guy who I know who doesn't believe in climate change to do something positive, I've been doing it for 4 years, and it's heartbreaking. It's ridiculous. To go up and just ask for the same things that we already have. To try to keep the one positive policy that we have for 3 years in a row. It's not a productive use of my time. Even though I have to do it, it's not where the future's coming from. And we need to figure out where the future's coming from and go underneath the Koch brothers, because they're swallowing the whole society.
And here, I really do think we need to learn from the past. One of my first vacations that I remember as a young boy, coming from Pennsylvania, was my parents taking us south as a family in 1968. And every city from Pennsylvania down to Atlanta was on fire because of the racial and anti-war tensions of the late 60s. And in Georgia, 95 wasn't finished yet, so you had to get off 95 on old 301, and you ended up, if you had to stop, we stopped at a place that had bathrooms that were separated, and drinking fountains that were separated. And I had not seen that. It was illegal, but it was still there. And I started putting it out, dumb Yankee that I was, with the Yankee license plate. My dad was worried about ending up in jail, so he whisked me into the car and explained it to me on the drive, and we didn't stop again until we were in Florida. But the point is, I'm not that old. I know you students think I'm really old, but I'm really not that old. And in my lifetime, segregation was legal in the South. What changed that? The Civil Rights Movement changed that. It wasn't there was no politician in the South that wanted to change segregation. Most of them were adamantly opposed to it. Right? And well, still are here.
The Kennedys didn't want to do it.
Right. And so it took that movement of the churches, of the synagogues. It took that movement of the little platoons of social organizations, the ACLU, groups like that, the NAACP. It took groups like that to change enough hearts and minds that we could eventually change the law, right? And so, that's what it's going to take on these kind of issues. If we wait for the politicians to get it right, we're going to be waiting a real long time, and you're going to bury me. Got to get one of my students in here. He's chomping at the bit. Awesome.
So I just had a question. It was mainly for the Monsignor, actually. Are there any resources? Are there any resources here on campus that us, the students, could mention to other students, or maybe within the community locally?
Yep. I'm very happy to say that the funding that helps make this possible tonight has also made possible the revamping and restarting of our environmental club here at Donnelly. And so we're back up and running. And this is what I believe, rather than taking Rabbi's lead on this, that I'm not going to tell you what to do as a club and the students what to do. You're going to work with your student advisor, and professor and you are going to work on figuring out what Donnelly can do locally. Hopefully you'll learn from the great resources we have around here. You might want to give some hints to our newly starting environmental club on what we should be looking at first.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I think don't waste your time on the styrofoam plate conversation. It's Reusable plates are not going to save the world. Renewable energy and distributed energy and weatherizing people's houses is going to save the world. Because that's what I would say. Doing good work in the community, got a lot of potential in this community for some good work. If you can teach yourself or find people who can help teach you how to do weatherization, Richard knows a lot about that. That's what I would focus.
So you mean like the big umbrella, the big ideas of the environment?
Yeah, I mean, what we want to do is lower our carbon usage. Anything that lowers our carbon usage is what you should be focusing on, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm an environmentalist, but I don't worry too much about the styrofoam plate conversation because it takes a lot of capital. Anybody been in a church where they've had this conversation? It takes forever, and there's a lot of resentment, and you can never do anything after it. So don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. Resilience is the word. How do you keep food in the community? Think about the community you have here. Food deserts. So how do you get good food and the knowledge of how to prepare and eat them into the minds and hearts of people who live in food deserts? Right? Where the only place they can go is the gas station. Right? So that's something to think about. Food is food is power. Because you're giving your money away to people who even knows what their interests are. But if you can find a way to build a garden to help to bring back the knowledge that your grandparents had about how to feed yourself. Look, think about, there's a lot of problems with sort of the traditional soul diet, but those people know how to take care of themselves on very little money. And that's what we need to do. We need to build our own resilience about how to save the future. Give the kids the power so they don't feel like there's nothing they can do. Richard's jumping up and down now.
Oh, yeah. You're in my area.
I hit his
These two can't, they say they won't tell you all what to do, but I will. I've been waiting, in fact, Monsignor and I talked about this a lot. I've been waiting for that organization to form. I've already got started building the garden. We got one in Minnesota. We got one sitting in front of the Holiday Inn over there in Minnesota. And we had basic grass level work that we educated people. Young man back here said, what can we do? I'll tell you right now, your whole generation needs to concentrate on educating our future generations. That is your responsibility. That's going to be your stewardship on this land, is to become aware of the fact that our future generations need you all to teach them about environmental literacy.
He's an educator.
And the other piece that's really obvious is, read Robert Bullard. Robert Bullard talks about how all the worst areas for pollution are in poor and communities of color, right? So literacy means in Kansas City, what's under the ground here, what's in the air here. Richard knows a lot about this stuff, but there's been a lot of industrial activity that's no longer here, but that has left scars on the landscape here that really need to be dealt with because they're continuing to poison the people that are here. So that's a big piece of it too, is knowing what the background is and addressing those and working some of the mechanisms of regulation are responsive to pressure. The EPA is responsive to some pressure. If you can get their attention, then you can get some action. The legislature might be a problem, but there's other areas of governmental function that function better.
Can you give examples of jobs? You talked about jobs and how that's going to be a goal that's going to help a lot of people, a lot of different jobs or same jobs. So can you broaden that a little bit?
Well, I was talking more specifically, in the context of this, I was talking about weatherization and distributed energy. So I know that the United Way here was sponsoring KCC, the community college, to teach people how to do weatherization. Now, what do those people do when they graduate? I don't know. But the question is, finding a context, so like you go there, you put your resume out, and can you please, give me a job, whatever. But if you can figure out a way, the question is who owns the capital, who develops the capital, who owns the business. So if the workers themselves own the business, then they're empowered. So finding a context, and that doesn't exist yet. See, that's what's the hard part. people have the training, people have the knowledge. There's a lot of people who are willing to give them the training and the knowledge. The question is what to do next. But I think that that's really where the potential is in this economy. Research and development, manufacturing less so because China does it cheaper. Installation, technology, there's a lot of potential here in improving the economy for movement in that area.
Yesterday, Donnelly College signed an agreement with the EPA locally to work in cooperation, partly because of internships and job opportunities for our students, but also the EPA wants to be educating the next generation on what kind of green jobs they're going to be in the future. And of course, right down the street is the environmental labs for the EPA. Though the main administration moved out to Johnson County, the labs are still here, right in our county, right in this part of the county, down in South 50, Minnesota. So it's still something that we believe is important. But I see the day when companies are going to be very focused on this because people won't buy from them if they're not. I grew up near a Procter & Gamble plant. Back then it was called Charmin. And there was no environmental regulations when they first came in, but then we recognized they were poisoning our water and dirtying our air. And the people said, we don't want that in our neighborhood. And all of a sudden, a whole group of chemists and scientists had put scrubbers on their smokestacks and had to learn how to take the water temperature and make it the same on the output as it was on the input, and it didn't have chemicals that were killing our fish. There was a lot of scientists that went to work to help Charmin do that. I'll give them credit. P&G is very good now. Being a neighbor when it comes to the environmental issues, and in doing so, they've made themselves a more profitable, a more long-lasting, a more user-friendly company. So that's what we're very proud of. We displayed it on the way in of our signature with the EPA because we really want to help our students, especially in the STEM area. We're fortunate enough right now to have a National Science Foundation grant to help students in STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, to get those kind of training that they need to make those kind of jobs possible for them. But we have a lot more work to do. Last question.
So once the Pope issued his encyclical, and before he even landed here in the United States, there were some fairly high percentages of Catholics in our U.S. Congress.
Yes.
And some of those,
highest ever, actually.
Some of those already started to say that they weren't going to be governed by this encyclical. So my question is, what is the plan among, say, the Catholic religious folks of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church to really have some pressure or some influence on those members of Congress to follow the encyclical?
I'll let you handle it.
First, I was telling this to the rabbi earlier today. Will Rogers used to say in the 30s, he used to tell audiences, I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Democrat, right? And I tell people I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Catholic, right? From the outside, people think we're this hierarchical structure, and the Pope says jump, and we all say how high. It's like being a college president. If I tell my faculty jump, they all say, what's the nature of jumping? Could we maybe move the earth and we stand still? We all have a debate and discussion about, and we never get around to if we're actually going to jump or not. As my godfather once said about our Catholic politicians, he said, they're so worried about imposing their religion on others, they don't even impose it upon themselves. Right? And this is a problem in the United States that goes back a long time. It's not just the United States. The biggest problem in the social teachings, according to every pope, except for John Paul I, because he only lived for 33 days, but since Pius XII to the Pope today, they've all at one time or another said something like this, that the biggest problem in the social teaching of the church, which is what we're talking about, is the disconnect between what people say and profess on Sunday and what they do Monday through Saturday. Right? And this is the problem what the Second Vatican Council referred to as the need for the unity of life. Right? That we have to begin not only to profess what we do on the Sabbath, but live it the rest of the week, right? And this is I think, the issue for the 21st century for Catholics. Are we finally going to practice what we say we believe, or aren't we? And if we don't, we have no one to blame but ourselves, because the truth always wins out in a long time. Believe it or not, there were Catholic parishes. The very first one I was assigned to as a seminarian, down on the Virginia-Tennessee border. And I get to this beautiful church. It's the only church in the whole county in this large part of Virginia. It gets pretty pretty spread out there in the western part of Virginia. And the pastor showed me around the church, and the spirals of this beautiful sanctuary were decorated with carved tobacco leaves, because that's what paid for it, tobacco. And it had the biggest balcony I've ever seen. And so immediately I said to the pastor, wow, you must have a great music tradition here, because you have such a big balcony. And he looked at me like I was a crazy man. Because he said, you idiot. This church was built before desegregation. That's where African Americans had to sit. Right? That was in the Catholic Church. Now, I'm proud that we desegregated earlier. I stand with the New York Times when it praised the Archbishop of New Orleans for excommunicating politicians, Catholic politicians, who would not put the faith into practice because they were segregationists. Right? And people say they don't want religion in politics, but it was a Baptist preacher from Atlanta that led the Civil Rights Movement. Right? And the Archbishop of New Orleans was right to excommunicate those politicians for not living their faith and being segregationists. It was incompatible with Catholic faith. Right? We may have to get to that time again where we say that. But we're not there. And I don't see any leader coming that's going to do that kind of thing. So we, faithful, have to say to our brothers and sisters, it's Matthew 18 in the New Testament, go for eternal correction. You're risking your immortal soul if you do not put the social church into teaching practice. You have the job as politicians. That's what the Pope said to them when he spoke there. You have a great vocation to serve the common good. And if you're not concerned about this stuff, then you're not serving the common good. The common good now and the intergenerational solidarity that we need. So we just have to be better brothers and sisters to our brothers and sisters in Congress and in legislature and say, look, this is not optional. You know, this is the stuff of what it means to be a follower of someone who laid down his life for us. I don't know. You don't have that problem, probably.
I was thinking, so the last thing I want to say is that I've been focused a lot lately on Dr. King. And he said that the triple threat was racism, materialism, and militarism. And those are still the threat, even more so in some areas. And that's still, I think, what we need to work on. And the other thing that you talked a lot about was building a beautiful community. And I work in an interfaith setting. I try to bring together, my movement tries to bring together people of all faiths and no faith to work on this issue. Because one of the issues that we have in this world, and we have it even more now than we did earlier, is sectarianism and hatred amongst groups based on faith. And that is not my understanding of what God wants. You know, if God wanted us to be one religion, then we'd be one religion. God must like the diversity. So how are we going to build the beloved community is with, you know, black, white, brown, yellow, red, and Catholic, Christian, all kinds, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, everybody. I mean, that's the way we need to build the community, and that's the way we need to build our future, and that's why interfaith is such an important value to me. That's the basis of what I do, because if we can't learn to be with each other, I think the Bible starts from particularism and moves out to universalism. If we can't figure out a way to be neighbors with each other, then we're not going to deserve the world that we don't have anymore. So think about that as we come out of here. Racism, materialism, militarism, the triple threat, and building the bullet.